Certainly good to be with all of you tonight. Happy for the presence of each one. As we mentioned this morning, we studied uh, the man born blind. That's mentioned in John chapter 9, and went through a number of verses, about 35 verses, in order to at least finish the first part of the chapter. Um, Jesus performed one of the great signs that is only found in the Gospel of John. John uh, records 7 great signs in his book, and the discourses that followed based upon those things that took place. And this particular sign certainly shows that Jesus Christ is the light of the world. And he demonstrated that that's just not a boast that he makes, but he has God's approval in saying those things because he was able to give sight to a man who was born blind. He uh, found the man and was able to anoint his eyes with clay that he made from spittle and from the dirt there on the ground, and told him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam, and he was healed when he washed and obeyed. And the man went to his neighbors, as we studied this morning, and the neighbors recognized him as the man that had been blind from birth. There were other acquaintances that said, no, he just looks like the man. And the man insisted, I am he, I am the man. And they took him, after recognizing who he was, to the Pharisees. We're told that this healing took place on the Sabbath day, and that there was a trial to determine whether this miracle had happened. The Pharisees, because of their traditions, believed that it was wrong to heal on the Sabbath day, that was regarded as working. It was wrong to make clay that Jesus used to anoint his eyes, and it was wrong to use the spittle to try to heal him. All of those different things they had in their traditions handed down from the judgments of their rabbis as being violations of the law of Moses when it tells us that we should not work on the Sabbath day. And of course, those are all man-made traditions and teachings that were added on to the actual words that were given by God. And so some said Jesus, of course, couldn't be healing anybody and couldn't be sent from God because he's a sinner. Others were saying, well, he did this great deed, therefore he couldn't be a sinner. He must be approved by God. And they asked the man what had happened, and he told them the procedure, asked him what he thought. He said that he thought he was a prophet. And they continued to question him. They didn't like that answer, so they said they weren't sure whether a real miracle had happened. They wanted to hear from the parents, call them in. The parents gave their testimony that this truly is our son. He was born blind, and now he sees. As to how he was made to see, we don't know. He's of age. You have to ask him. They were afraid of the Jews because they had determined that anybody that confessed Jesus as the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. So they went back to questioning the man again. That he's a sinner to these things, and he should give glory to that healed him. He pointed out about he was a sinner. This is the one that opened his eyes. He knows they still weren't satisfied. Press their argument. Finally, the man is the fact that then whether he from or able to open his eyes was an amazing thing. Nothing like born blind had ever happened. Jesus by God, or he would not be. And he even went from the scriptures that the prayers of sinners, and God heard Jesus. So Jesus must be right from God. And tried to teach angry, they kicked him out. And Jesus found him after he had been kicked out, feeling at that point. So in verse 35, Jesus heard out, and finding him, he said, "Is he, Lord, that I'm him?" So had this encounter with the land, and it was all in vain. Now he's with the maybe was even at the synagogue, and now what? Well, the Lord, doesn't tempt somebody beyond what they're able to bear. He sent him some encouragement by coming to him. He sought him out. He gives him an opportunity to confess the truth about who Jesus really is, the full extent of who he is. Not just a man like he started off with, not just a prophet, but Jesus is the Son of Man. He is the one that was prophesied in the book of Daniel that he would come, that he would be the Messiah, that he would reign on God's throne and rule over the house of Israel in Daniel chapter 7. So the Messiah is who Jesus is. Well, the man says, I can just confess what I know. I need some more information about who this Son of Man is. Even though he believes Jesus is a prophet, that he's sent from God, but he doesn't know for sure about who the Messiah is. But since Jesus is a miracle worker, he's got divine approval for the things he teaches. If Jesus tells him who the Son of Man is, he would believe on it, right? That'd be the proper thing to do for a man with Jesus' credentials. So he expresses his belief that Jesus can reveal the truth to him. Lord, and maybe at this point the word Lord is either used for a term of respect for somebody that you have high esteem for, or it's also used in a sense of offering somebody divine honors. Well, at this point, probably he's just speaking respectfully. He'll use the word in the other way, probably in a verse or two. So Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you." So the Son of Man, Jesus reveals himself clearly. I am the Son of Man. I am the Messiah. I'm the Christ that everybody's been waiting on to come and rule over the kingdom of God. And I'm standing right here before you, and you are seeing me with your eyes and hearing me with your ears. And I am the one. So he's got both sight and hearing and the witness of Jesus. And you have Jesus as plain as day identifying himself to him as the Christ. Very similar to the revelation that was given to the Samaritan woman when she made the statement, well, when the Christ comes, he'll explain everything to us. And Jesus said, I who speak to you am he. Just as plainly, he tells the blind man there that's been healed, I am the Christ. And the man is consistent with what he said. You tell me who he is, I'll believe in him. And now that he's got this witness from Jesus about his identity, and he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. So he understands that this is the Son of God. And you see what a great growth he had as he goes through this experience. He believes Jesus is a miracle worker, that he's a prophet. And now he's the Son of Man, and he is even divine, worthy of worship as the Christ and the Son of God. So you have evidence of the power of Jesus, his divine mission that he has been sent on, and he calls him this time Lord, and it's probably used in the sense of a reverent address to God. So he confesses him with his words, and then he worshiped him. He confesses his complete trust and belief in him, in that he bows down and worships him. He does reverence to him, shows homage, gives him divine worship. And he confesses then in deeds that Jesus is who he says, and that he truly believes him. Again, this is another case where Jesus received divine worship, showing that he recognized what all of us are called upon to confess. that he's not only the Christ, the descendant of David, according to the flesh, but he also is God with us, Emmanuel, that he shares the nature of God the Father, and that he is a member and a part of the Godhead. So he's one that's worthy of worship. There's some liberal scholars that teach about this word proskuneo is the word there for worship, that means to bow down, to prostrate yourself, to do reverence. In Thayer's Greek lexicon, it kind of offers up a couple of options, that it could be, reverence shown to some high official that you bow down to. Now, Thayer was a liberal theologian, and he kind of gives the idea that Jesus wasn't worshiped during his earthly ministry. That only came later, is what liberal theologians teach, right? Jesus really, this is just something made up by the church later, that we worship him as God. But that's not the way this word is used in the New Testament. This word is always used about divine worship, that you're worshiping somebody that is God. And the other lexicon I have in my office, it points that out, makes that clear. It shows even among the Greeks, if they bowed down to a ruler, it's because they thought that ruler had certain divinity, right? Certain attachment to God is why you were bowing down even to an earthly leader of some kind, like Alexander the Great or whatever, or the Pharaoh, is that you thought he was a son of God or connected to God some way. In the New Testament, it's always used about the worship that you give to God. Let's look at a few verses that show that Jesus is God. It's used over talking about the wise men. They came all the way from the east. They saw the star. And they came to find the King of the Jews, right? The King of Israel. And they brought with them precious gifts. And they bowed down and worshiped him when they found him. And it uses the same word. Some would say, oh, well, they just thought he was an earthly king, and he bowed down like you bow down to an earthly king. No, they must have had a revelation that he is divine. Chris read Isaiah chapter 9 tonight. Didn't that prophecy foretell that he would be called, this child that's going to be born to us? Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Prince of Peace. He's going to be called God. So the Christ was not just a man, he was going to be divine. And there was some revelation given to these wise men. When they came into the city, they say, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. Well, they recognized he wasn't just a man. He was more than a man. And the same word is used there for the blind man bowing down and worshiping Jesus. In Matthew 2 and verse 11, and after coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshiped him. And then opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. But they recognized this child was really something special. It certainly seems that they had received a revelation before they saw the star. That God had spoke to them and told them about who this is that's going to be born. That's why they set off on this journey. They weren't just going to see some petty king over a little group of people. They were going to see the Christ, the Son of God, that was going to be born. And again, this miraculous revelation started the journey. They had a miraculous revelation at the end of their journey that came to them saying, don't go back to Herod, but go and leave the country another way. So God spoke to them at the end, and it seems most likely he spoke to them in the beginning too. They didn't know about probably Micah chapter 5 and verse 2. You remember they went in and they asked, where is he who's going to be born King of the Jews? And the scribes had to look through the Old Testament scriptures. The wise men didn't know where he was going to be born. The star had left them. And they turned to Malachi, and it says there that he would be born in Bethlehem. And in that same passage it says that his goings forth are from all eternity. This is a divine person that's going to be born in Bethlehem. But the wise men didn't know that passage. Somebody had to look it up for them. There's another passage about a star coming out of Judah that would be a ruler over Israel. That's a pretty obscure passage. They probably didn't know that one. They might have read Isaiah like Chris read tonight. That talked about the Christ being divine. That's a very well-known passage. But they come into town. They were told the child is going to be born there in Bethlehem, but they didn't know, or they weren't told he was going to be born in Bethlehem, so they're blundering around Jerusalem saying, where is he who's born King of the Jews? Which is a bad idea with Herod on the throne, right? He's jealous of everybody. He kills his own children that he thinks might take the throne from him. Several of them. And they come in, where's he born King of the Jews? They got no idea about Herod and his attitude. And they don't know the scriptures to know Bethlehem is the place. That gave the entire nation a preliminary announcement that the Son of God has been born, the Christ has been born, and these wise men have come all the way from the east to find him. Don't you know there was a great deal of excitement about that? And then kind of got brought to a terrible end to the excitement when all of those little children were murdered by Herod in the city of Bethlehem, 2 years old and younger, because one of them might be the Christ. But Joseph and Mary were warned to take Jesus somewhere else. So they came there and worshiped. These wise men must have been given that revelation. God revealed this profound fact to the shepherds, didn't he? He says there is a child that has been born who is Christ the Lord. So he is both the Messiah and he's the Lord. He's the one we should worship. And they regard Jesus certainly more as an earthly king or a petty local king in a tiny little province in the Roman Empire. This is somebody much bigger than that they've come all the way from the east to worship and give these precious gifts to as presents and to bow down and worship. There's also worship, again, used about the devil. What kind of worship did the devil want, though? Did he want worship like a king gets or a man gets? No, he wanted the worship that God gets. That's the way the word is used, isn't it? When it talks about that worship, Satan showed Jesus all of the kingdoms of the earth and their glory. And then he says, all of these things I will give to you if you fall down and worship me. And then Jesus said to him, go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. So how's worship used in the New Testament? Wise men worshiped one they thought was divine. Satan wanted divine worship, didn't he? And Jesus said, no, you can't do that. We only give that worship to God. It's the only one that should get divine worship. So when that blind man bowed down, he thought Jesus was God with us, right? In Revelation chapter 19 and verse 10, we're told about John bowing down to an angel and worshiping, same words used. Then I fell at his feet to worship him, but he said to me, do not do that. I am a fellow servant of yours and of your brethren who hold the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of the prophets. So John, I don't know if he mistaken this angel for Jesus, but he bowed down to a messenger that wasn't Jesus. And the angel said, no, you don't. You don't bow down to me. That is divine worship. That belongs to God. You never do that. Worship of angels, got to reject that, or any other created being we don't worship. We worship God, and Jesus Christ is God. We recognize him as God the Son, right? He is God. He shares a divine nature with the Father. And divine worship repeatedly in the book of Revelation, that we bow down and worship Christ. You see the angels doing it, all those around the throne. Worthy, worthy, worthy is the Lamb to receive that kind of treatment. The worship of Peter and Paul and Barnabas, people tried to worship them, and the same word is used. We're told about when Peter had gone into Cornelius. Cornelius had an angel tell him to send for Peter because his prayers had been heard. And Peter would speak words to him whereby he would be saved, he and all his house. And then after 3 days, Peter came to him. And when he came into his house, here is a man that's a messenger sent from God. And Son of God. And we believe and confess that he's not only the Christ, but he is also the Son of God. So when we see this proskumino there, we understand it uniformly is for the worship offered to God. It's not offered to created beings, no matter what some liberal scholar wants to do to tear down the deity of Christ. That's not the way it's used in the New Testament. Divine worship of the man born blind gave Jesus. It is the result of all of his profound thoughts about who Jesus is. He came to understand from the miracles that caused him to be able to see again miraculously, and the majesty when Jesus revealed himself to him, that he was one worthy of worship. Think about a whirlwind of deep convictions, one writer says, a solemn dedication that he offers there to Jesus is evidence that the man's humble confession, Lord, I believe, was real. When he bowed down and worshiped, he really believed it, just like we need to really believe it. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He is the one that can save us, the one we better listen to in all that he teaches. He is the Son of God. He prostrates himself on the ground before Christ in divine worship, and it reminds you when you see people in the Old Testament bow down when they are in the presence of God or a vision of God of some kind or another. This is the same way Jesus is treated. Then he has the final discussion with those that are Pharisees. Some of them were standing nearby as Jesus spoke to this man and overheard this statement. And Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." So Jesus came into this world to make salvation possible. He came into this world to show us the light of truth, to enlighten our minds, to understand how to that he's the Christ and that we need to believe in him and obey him. And through his sacrifice, we can have forgiveness of sins. All of those things, Jesus came to reveal the way to be saved. And if you reject his mission, instead of being a mission of salvation to you, becomes a mission of judgment because you've rejected God's answer. You've rejected God's grace that's being offered to get out of sin. It makes you more worthy of condemnation if you reject Jesus after he comes to show you the truth, and he comes with all of those credentials and miracles that he did. He gave physical light to the blind, and he'll give spiritual light to those that'll acknowledge their blindness. What if he'd have come and said, I'll heal you your blindness? And the man said, oh, I'm fine. I can see just fine. Well, why would you help that guy, right? If Jesus comes, I've got the truth from God on how to be saved and how to please God, and people say, oh, no, we see already. We don't need truth. Well, that's what a lot of people do. They're spiritually blind. They don't know how to get back to God and how to make themselves right, but they won't listen to Jesus. They won't be humble enough to admit their errors and their faults. In order to be saved and receive this spiritual sight that Jesus is the light of the world, you got to be humble. Say, Lord, your servant is listening. Teach us. We don't know the way to God. We don't know how to have our sins. You tell us, we'll do it. That kind of humble, contrite heart are the ones that are privileged because they're willing to obey the Lord and do his will. Then they'll be able to see. So it's all about the attitude of heart that a person has. And we have to keep that attitude of heart. We don't ever want to grow arrogant and puffed up in our thinking that we don't think we need the Lord anymore. We don't need to learn anymore. We're not ready to be further instructed in the things that he has to teach. Jesus talks about that those who see may become blind, those that think they see. The one that's stubborn has a perverse heart, that person's going to remain in darkness. These Pharisees and scribes, they think they see, oh, we have all knowledge. We have so much knowledge of God's will. We instruct all of the poor people out there that don't have any light. They thought they were the light. They could see, but what did Jesus call them in Matthew 23:16? It says these Pharisees are blind guides of the blind. Blind man follows a blind man, they'll all fall into the pit, right? They're following human tradition. They need to listen to the Son of God that's come to teach them the way of truth. Those that believe themselves to be guardians of the light or themselves in total spiritual darkness, they're unwilling to walk in the light when Jesus came. Those that see are going to become blind. Those that think they have all of the vision. Isaiah prophesied of these kind of stubborn people that when the word of God is preached to them, they're too arrogant to listen. He said, go and tell this people, keep on listening, but do not perceive. Keep on looking, but do not understand. Render the hearts of this people insensitive, their ears dull, and their eyes dim. Otherwise, they will see with their eyes and hear with their hearts and understand, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and return and be healed. Isaiah kept preaching to these people and preaching to these people, and the more you preach to the arrogant and the self-satisfied, the harder and hard they get. Jesus has come as the light of the world, and as long as people say, oh, we see, we don't need him, they're going to remain in darkness. They get stubborn of heart and blind, just like those people in Isaiah's day. Here's what Jesus said on another occasion in Matthew 11:25, and at that time Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Those that are humble in heart, those that think they've got a lot to learn, they're the ones that see the truth about Jesus Christ. You have to have a humble, teachable attitude in order to be instructed. As long as you're arrogant and full of your intellectual pride and all your study, you don't listen to the Lord like you should. Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, we are not blind too, are we? So we can see that attitude right there. Surely you're not talking about us being blind. not the scribes and Pharisees. I mean, not us. Very contemptuously asked there, are we blind? And we're told in the Greek by Greek scholars, it's stated in such a way that it expects a negative answer. So there's two groups, the blind, but they're made to see. And those that think they see, and because of that, they confirm their blindness by rejecting Jesus. The Pharisees believe they see. Well, we're not in either group you're talking about, but they are spiritually blind. They don't really see the whole truth about how to be saved. They don't recognize Jesus is the Christ. And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say we see, your sin remains. Well, somebody will admit that they can't see, or if somebody is really blind, in another sense you could say they don't have any opportunity to believe, they don't have any opportunity, so you wouldn't be held accountable for rejecting Jesus if you can't see. They claim they do see everything. They see everything. They've got all the opportunities. They know the Bible. They know everything about what's supposed to be about the Christ. So they confess to see. They think they understand, and then they reject Jesus. They're guilty of a great sin. When you really do know the truth and you don't accept it, you're doubly guilty, aren't you? I mean, that's worse. It's one thing to be ignorant and not follow the truth, but if you say, I know, and then you don't follow the truth, that's especially bad. So, thinking they see is a perpetual barrier to them as far as their reception of the truth. Again, it's a warning to all of us to continue to remain humble on any Bible subject we study. Not just think we know it all. Let's go back to the Scriptures and study it anew. And let's make sure that what we think we see is really what the Scriptures say. Be noble-minded and search the Scriptures to see if these things are so. They oppose the truth, and in the book of Matthew, he says they even try to block the people from coming to the truth, even though they won't enter themselves. So, as one writer said, none are so blind as those who will not see. That's the category these scribes and Pharisees fall into. It says your sin remains. This spiritual blindness and your accountability for not accepting the truth is still on you because you won't accept the Christ. Well, let's look at in closing at the dramatic nature of this account that the Apostle John has given to us. I mean, this is right in the middle of this gospel, and it is a big section and a big highlight of his gospel. I think he must have thought so himself as he was revealing these things to the church. In chapter 20 and verse 28, you kind of the second half of the book, you get the grand climax where Thomas sees the Lord raised from the dead and the nail prints in his hand, and Jesus says, come put your finger in the nail prints and in my side. Don't be unbelieving, but believe. And then Thomas says, my Lord and my God. He comes to the conclusion, Jesus is God. Well, in the middle of the book, see, we got the blind man coming to that same conclusion. And what a dramatic thing it is. Earlier in John 11, Mary and Martha worshiped Jesus. Same word is used. But they had certainly some great advantages. They saw, their brother raised from the dead. They had the advantage of all of the background of being around Jesus, and they were from an educated group of people that had all kinds of opportunities to learn the Bible and understand things. They'd been instructed by Jesus for several years. They'd had fellowship with Jesus. He was close friends with them. And so that they bowed down and worshiped him, that's great. That they saw he was the Son of God. But think about that blind man. He didn't have all those advantages. He'd been sitting in the dark, right? He just had to pick up a little here and there about Jesus. He didn't have all the opportunities Mary and Martha did. And yet he came to see that Jesus Christ is one worthy of worship. The blind man didn't have that sight. He's a great story about a rags to riches, isn't he? I mean, he was really, you think about his circumstances, a beggar. He's a beggar, and he's raised from that low place to be a hero to all of us. for all time. All of us look up to that blind man and the type of reason he had and the way he worked, even against the big religious teachers. He shut them down. And look how he started off. He found himself with this encounter with Christ, and by his faith and obeying and washing, he got his sight back. And then he was confronted right away. Just think, you're just healed. I just think about somebody, you've just been baptized and you get drug in before the religious court. And you don't have any background, and you got to stand up for your faith. And look how well he did. He stood up in front of all of those men, and they had furious opposition to him. He was under threat. People getting kicked out of the synagogue for disagreeing with him. And he used that remarkable reasoning ability to declare what the facts were. He stuck with the facts. He reasoned from those facts that Jesus came from God. He's a prophet, and he's a man approved of God. And he stated his convictions. And he reasoned even from the scriptures that he was able to understand that God doesn't hear sinners. He hears those that are righteous. That's high moral courage that he had, that all of us can look up to, and devotion to the truth. He really is a hero of faith, and somebody very special to get to read about and to know. His confession of faith is really one for all ages that John wrote down for us. Isn't it a blessing? The other Gospels don't tell that story, but John thought all of us needed to know about that account, and he included it in the fourth Gospel and gives it to us. Well, brethren, I hope this has been a faith-building story for you. It certainly is for me to remember these things and see all of the powerful evidence that's presented there. Hopefully we can all be as courageous and reasonable in defending the faith as that blind man was as well. This time we want to extend the Lord's invitation to those that are present this evening. If you've not obeyed the gospel, we want to encourage you to do so. If you need the prayers of the church, you need to be baptized into Christ, if you have any need, let us know as together we stand and sing.